Hello, Abigail here with the Tarotscopes for Taurus season, Pisces sun, moon, and rising. My Pisces folks, this Taurus season is a bit of gear shift. I really am looking forward to it. There's a bit more space. We don't have any once in a lifetime slash kind of overwhelming eclipse seasons to face. We have not fewer astrological events, but definitely lower in intensity. We do have some pretty intense lunar moments. The Taurus new moon is one that comes to mind, and the full moon in Scorpio is conjunct Uranus. So they are kind of the trigger points of the season, but there is space in between the kind of the bigger spaces versus Aries season and Pisces season, where it just kind of felt like it was one thing after the other, and even in Aquarius season as well. We are still in the post shadow retrograde, so it does feel as though things are a bit slower, but I think this gives us space to do a lot of exploration and allowing ourselves to kind of settle into the energy and the lessons that we learned during the retrogrades. So it's an opportunity to kind of exist, which is something that I know appeals to a lot of the Pisces folks that I engage with. There are some things like Venus coming through and hitting all of the points in Pisces. However, that is over pretty early in Taurus season, and you're kind of going to be free for a second of the kind of hectic activity in the sign of Pisces. So it feels like there's going to be more space for you to do what you want. And we're heading ever closer to having, Saturn in Aries, which of course it'll retrograde back and be back in Pisces on September 1st. I believe that's the date. But we are getting kind of a clearing sense here. And what I've seen in several of the other readings, because you're towards the tail end, I start with the sign that the season starts with, so Taurus season. So, and I do them in order, so you're second to last. It does feel as though this is an opportunity to kind of re-engage with your spiritual journey and reconnect with, maybe things that have kind of fallen off. For me, I haven't done much work at my altar recently, and it's in a bit of a shambles. And it's not, I don't want you to enter into this in shame and be like, I've fallen off, but it's time to reconnect. We have space to do so. Our spirits in the universe understand that we get overwhelmed and, things can be tough. So it does feel as though this is an opportunity in a moment, especially for Pisces heavy people, to really kind of dive back into spiritual things and reconnecting with guides and specifically ancestors, which I'll explain that in a moment, as we head through this kind of nourishing, reconnecting season of Taurus. Starting with your oracle card, we have Ancestral Alchemy, Conjure Your Legacy. So we have this beautiful ancestral card, and we have some ancestral points over here in the tarot. So I am excited. There is a lot of information and messages coming through from ancestors. I also love the fact that it talks about conjuring your legacy. If you believe in past lives, or if you just believe in multiple dimensions or things like that, you are also an ancestor of yourself. It's this kind of giant circle effect. And sometimes in ancestral readings, past life iterations will come up as ancestors. So, this is a great time to reconnect with yourself. It's a great time to reconnect with ancestors of blood. It's a great time to reconnect with ancestors of land and ancestors of time. A lot of people, especially like more current belief, is that there are ancestors of interest as well, like certain forms of art and things like that. Well, my light just died. And I'm back. All right, fix the lighting problem. So, kind of getting back into it, there's a lot of, I love working with the ancestors. They're some of the easiest to kind of connect with. And there's a lot of beautiful lessons to learn. Also, because ancestors are human souls, there are a lot of interesting, how shall I say it, interpersonal connections. Because when a soul passes over or is from a different iteration or lifetime, they don't all of a sudden stop being a human soul. They're not any less complex. They're not more elevated. They're not better people. They just are who they are, coming from a more elevated perspective. So it can teach us a lot about communication and boundaries and respect and learning to kind of communicate intentionally when we work with ancestors, which I find really beautiful. And kind of this whole spread is really about ancestry and connection and how we integrate these types of spiritual connections together. Obviously, from a more practical point, if we're talking about like maybe some of you didn't come here for guidance about, connecting with spirit, but I think it can apply to our day to day life, considering how things have been done, how they should be done, what historically has been done. Learning about history and integrating it to your life can be a great way to understand your condition now, understand how we got here. Um, if you're wondering why the world is the way it is today, history is a great place to start. So, part of the reason I'm giving this advice is we have the Hierophant. I think, especially with the imagery of this card, I think we are being asked to connect with, if we're coming from a spiritual lens, to a specific ancestor who is waiting for us, someone who has a lot of wisdom and a lot of things that they want to share. And if we're thinking about it from an external side, just talking about history and learning, finding a source to get, to get your information from, finding different perspectives, recognizing where mistakes have been made. I think one of the things, especially in the US, that a lot of us have the hardest time doing is accepting the harm that has happened and our place in it as a part of the collective. And part of it is too is US culture is really based in guilt and shame. So there's this like hatred of looking in the mirror and seeing what actually is there because we feel so guilty and ashamed of stuff. Whereas guilt and shame gets us nowhere. Like maybe it might push us to like start a journey, but it's not going to help you on the journey. The best thing you can do is do better this time, is to refuse to make the same mistakes that your ancestors did, to not hide the truth of our history, to talk about land back and repatriation of land to indigenous people, reparations, things like that, without guilt and shame. And then so many people are like, well, our ancestors did that, it's not your fault. Okay, fine. It's not my fault, but the mess is still here. The consequences of their action are still here, and I am a part of their lineage. So yeah, it is a part of my responsibility to try to set things right. And no, it's not going to be perfect. That's not the point. The point is that we do it. So in this season, reconnect back to your roots, reconnect back to, I think one of the hardest things about ancestral work is reconnecting back to past sins, to reconnecting back to harm, to realizing the damage done and being able to work with your ancestors to try to rectify it. And if they're not ready to rectify it, then going into the spiritual work of asking why and asking why they think that it's okay that they did what they did. Not to be like, naughty you or like how horrible of you, but be like, we need to understand this so we can move forward so that they can also be free from their past. And find a way to work towards a future where things are equitable for the people that have been harmed by our lineage. And with the Hierophant, it is about recognizing that there are sources that are more valuable and better than us, especially on topics that we're not educated in, and that we need to go find those sources and take responsibility for the knowledge that we learn and we gain, which I think is a really important lesson, not just spiritually, but in life in general, being able to accept harm, to sit in difficult emotions, and then also take action rather than just being stuck in either denial or shame or guilt. But moving forward and being like, you know what, not this time. We're going to do things differently. And that ties right into the Ace of Coins. It is time to start a new legacy. It is time to rethink and repave and restructure and retell our stories, not in the sense of like changing what the stories were, but in telling them more honestly, in saying this is what an ancestor did that was really bad. I have a couple ancestors who were absolutely monstrous. Like we're talking, if they could have been slave owners in the 1960s, they would have been, and they would have been the absolute most horrendous ones. That level of evil and vile behavior. And I don't work with them personally because firstly, they haven't come forward. And secondly, I don't want to work with someone like that. But I tell their story. I don't let that story die. I don't let the harm that they did disappear, because it is a lesson to all of us of what happens when you remove the humanity from other people and what it does to your soul. It's an important story to tell. So start telling stories about your family. Start looking into your past. tell the ugly ones, tell the good ones, tell the painful ones. A revelation I had on my dad's side, which I don't talk to him anymore, is that his great grandfather died of suicide, and there was a very strong, um, uh, a very strong kind of thread of escapism. I'm not talking about the suicide; it's more the escape from the event that happened. Not saying that loss of life was specifically escapism. I don't know why that person decided to do that. Um, but the escapism from the future generations, especially through the male line, and how that affected people, and how that dissociation and refusal to kind of face what has happened created harm and ended up with a long line of people who are not connected and unable to parent and to feel their feelings fully, and what has led down to, me not speaking to my parents. So, find those stories, seek it out, do a little genealogical research. And then we have this lovely King of Swords. King of Swords. I have my glasses on. King of Swords. There's also a great power in Piscean signs and traits. It gives you a lot of skill sets and abilities to do things. Maybe lean into those this season, stretch back, and participate more in the skill sets that you have as a Pisces, and your ability to kind of walk between worlds and connect with things that are invisible and expand into energy that is unknowable. Um, Using that kind of force that you have as a person to really test out your skills and your spiritual power and your ability to do things. I think it's important to flex and to know the extent of our abilities so that we can know where we want to grow, and we can also know where we need to like maybe take a step back, and also really find who we need to work with spiritually on our path. I work with several groups of spirits, and I think a lot of people, not everyone, but that's how it works for a lot of people. So maybe invite some spirit groups in to work with you. See what happens when you invite energy in. Then we have Four of Wands, which really reminds me of the fourth house, which is where ancestors live. Pardon me, I have tummy issues, and I also drank a seltzer. It's about really getting that home space nice. So if you have an altar, or if you've been wanting to set one up, clearing that space, making it more home-like. If you have a space that you haven't decorated for yourself yet, do that. I also struggle with this. I was raised in rentals. My parents were very literal, undiagnosed autistic people. So we literally would never hang anything in these places. And when we did end up in a home that we were allowed to kind of do stuff to, there was a lot of checks from my parents of like what we could and couldn't do. So if you haven't set up a home space in the place you live in, Taurus season is a beautiful time to create a really lovely, caring, held space for you. One where you can feel safe and spiritually, one where you can connect to yourself, one where other people can come in and really sense your energy. I think it's really important that we make homes for ourselves, especially in the times that we live in, making sure that the place that we live in is authentic to us, regardless of what we have to do externally. And then last but not least, we have the Three of Wands. The time is now. If you feel like you need to do something, do it. I don't think there's a whole lot of pressure in Taurus season to do a bunch of stuff, but I do think that you might have been waiting for a sign. This is the sign. Do that thing. You have the resources. You have everything you need to do what you need to do, my dear Pisces folks. All right, this is my reading for you all. Blessed Taurus season. If you have any comments, pop them in the comment section. If you want to, you can like and subscribe. And I will see you all in a different space and time.